welcome back to another episode of But What If I Soar podcast. I am your co-host, Deveron, Social MacGyver.
And I am Dominique, Free to Be Counseling Services.
We are so happy to have you guys return. This is going to be another episode, a part of our relationship series. And this episode is going to be about romantic partners. And so I think that this will be a good episode. Myself and Dom are both married. And so we will be able to kind of talk about that from a marriage standpoint, but also, just dating and things like that. So I think that it will be a good episode. Before we jump into the episode, I do want to start off with a high and a low. So, Dom, from these last couple of weeks, what is one high and low that you have experienced?
Yeah, so a high for me has been music. There's been some good albums that have come out recently, and music is definitely therapeutic for me. So I've been listening to Victoria Monet's Jaguar 2 album, and I didn't realize how much music she has done. I know she's done a lot of stuff behind the scenes, but she also has lots of music from the time that she's kind of been in the industry. So it kind of took me down like a little bit of a rabbit hole there because I didn't really know how much music she had. But this Jaguar 2 album is so good. So I've been like listening to that, and then Diddy came out with an R&B album called Off the Grid, which is so good. It definitely does mix a little bit of, I would say kind of traditional R&B with some of the other, kind of, experimental R&B that, that this genre has kind of been able to kind of tap into. So it's a really good album. I forgot that it was coming out, and on Friday, my husband sent me the album, and I listened to it during the day, and have been just listening to it throughout the weekend. So that has been definitely a high. I also finished the Brene Brown book that I was reading called Braving the Wilderness. That was a really good book. It actually wasn't what I kind of initially anticipated, but I do think that I definitely got a lot out of it. It definitely got me to think a little bit more about some of the aspects of the book. And so I am now reading. I've also kind of been in my parenting bag a little bit in the last couple of weeks too. And I've had a lot of parenting books that I've purchased. As we talked about on this podcast, I do purchase a lot of books and don't always get to read them the way I want to. But I am now currently reading a book called Parenting from the Inside Out by Daniel Siegel, and there's another author, and it's been out for a long time, but they recently did a 10-year anniversary re-release. So I've been reading that, and essentially the premise of the book is that if you can make sense of your own childhood experiences and your upbringing, that you can, come to the experience of parenting a lot better. And so I like Daniel Siegel because he's a child psychiatrist. He has done a lot of work in adolescent work and trauma, and he just explains the brain in such a way that for somebody who might be a layperson could totally understand what he's talking about. And I've always liked him for that. I think I was introduced to him maybe like 7 or 8 years ago when I did my first trauma training, when I was taking the training to become a certified trauma professional. And I was like in such awe of like how knowledgeable he is, but also just how easy and simplistic he makes like the brain. He talks about it in such a way that's just so easy to understand. So that's the book that I read. So those were my two highs. I really don't think I've had any lows. So I'm just gonna roll with that. Yeah, no lows. No lows. Yeah,
Look,
no lows.
a win is a win.
A win is a win. I would take it. What about you, Deb? How about you?
So I think for me, a high is I'm getting ready to start a new position with a new company. So I'm really excited about that. It's a new chapter, and I'm looking forward to all of just the opportunities that it will bring, and just growing professionally and challenging me to grow professionally. I think that that's going to be great.
Yeah.
I have completed the remaining hours that I needed, even though I did them already. I completed the second round of hours that I needed to sit for my LCSW. So
Nice.
I will be submitting that to the board very soon to go ahead and get approval to sit for the LCSW. So that's exciting. And then we are preparing, as you know, to
Mm-hmm.
celebrate our vow renewal of 10 years in like
Yeah.
2 weeks. So I'm so excited for the
Same.
vow renewal, but also just to be around my loved ones and just make,
Mm-hmm.
memories. And I'm just really excited about that.
Yeah, same here. Same here. I'm like, it's a much needed trip. So I'm
Yes.
excited as well. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. And I would say a low would just be, I think, I have been missing my mom and my grandmother a lot
Yeah.
more, as well as my uncle and my grandfather, but mostly my mother and my grandmother have been heavy on my mind,
Mm-hmm.
especially with getting ready for the vow renewal because both my
Yeah.
mom and my grandmother were very creative and they were known as like the party people. So like if you had an event or anything, my grandma was gonna cook, all types of
Mm-hmm.
food. She was a sewer, so she would be, getting outfits together. Like she was just my grandma was everything. Like there was
Yeah.
nothing that she could not do. And my mom was just someone who even sometimes I'd be like, okay, mom, like that's enough. Like, why are you still buying things? And I said it was good.
Right.
But like I just missed that aspect of having two people who go overboard like I do because I'm like that in that aspect where
Yeah.
if my loved one is having something, I'm normally going to be the person who is going to be doing things you didn't ask me to do, but I just want to help you because that's the way that was part of my love language.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just one of those things where grief never ends. It ebbs and flows. Some days it's harder, some days it's easier, and this is
Yeah.
just one of those reminders of missing people who would have been a part and be a big part of the event and experience, and they're not. But
Yeah.
I'm utilizing my coping skills. I'm relying on my therapist. I talk a lot with my husband in regards to how I'm feeling. So I'm checking in with myself. I think that's all you can do, right? You gotta
Yeah.
kind of just learn to float when you need to and learn to like stand when you need to. But the waves of grief are gonna come. So that's what
Yeah.
I'm doing.
That's very true. It's 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 so complicated. It's such a complicated experience. Grief is, because some days you're good, and then when something great happens, the first person you want to call is the person that you can't call anymore, right? And the
Hmm.
first people or person that you want to share those experiences with, you can't. Or when you're struggling and feeling overwhelmed, again, those are the same people that you want to reach out to, and so I'm glad that you're finding a way to kind of get through it, and also just acknowledging that it's okay. It's okay that this is kind of where you are. Loss is hard. It never gets easier, no matter how much we can prepare for it. So I'm just glad that you're
Yeah.
you're you're
I
able
definitely
to
agree.
kind of make peace with it, and in spite of the loss, and not having those people physically with you, that you're still going to put one foot in front of the other.
And that's all you can do, I
Mhm.
think I'm very open about my grief journey and having
Mhm.
back-to-back losses and
Mhm.
you just have to take the good with the bad and I look at grief now as just love being expelled from the body of,
Yeah.
having someone who is no longer here in physical form. So,
Mhm.
I'm I'll get through it. It'll be a wonderful event. I know my mom and grandmother and uncle and grandfather will be shining down on us that
Mhm.
day and, you know, probably will make their presence known some way or another. But
I'm sure. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm sure. Which will be nice. It'll be nice for you and for Mercy. Like, it'll just be nice, to
Yeah.
have that, extra presence, you know what I mean, with all of us. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Probably drink a Bud Light lime for my mom.
oh yeah, we definitely got to do that. We definitely got to do that.
And I
No,
mean
we
drink
have
beer.
to do that. Like, for real. No, we have to. I'm so glad you said that, because now we got to get some before we come down. Like,
Yeah.
for real, we got to do that. Yeah.
So now that we talked about our highs and lows for the week, I want to go ahead and jump in. We have prepared some questions.
Hmm.
So Dom, do you want to go first? You want me to ask
Yeah,
the first question? How
I'll
do you
ask
want
the
to do
first question. Yeah.
it? All right.
So remember, this is us kind of unpacking and exploring some of our romantic relationships. So the first question is, reflect on a moment when you felt truly vulnerable with your partner. How did that vulnerability impact your connection, and what did you learn about trust and intimacy?
Oh, I have a good one for this. So, when me and Mercy had dated, I guess you can call dated, for a while, and then we, kind of went our separate ways. And then when I was in school in Florida, we kind of reconnected again. And, he would come visit me and stuff. And, we had a good relationship. But Mercy, prior to us kind of reconnecting, he hadn't ever been fully around my family, right?
Mhm,
And so my cousin was getting married, and I had actually moved back to Westchester, or back to PA and moved to Westchester to go to grad school. My cousin was getting married, and Mercy was coming to the wedding with me.
mhm.
And we grew up in a small town. So Mercy kind
Yeah,
of knew about my mom and things like that, but he didn't really, like, we never talked about it, right?
yeah,
And so he knew things about my sisters as well, but again, we just never talked about it. Like, he just knew. He kind of, obviously, dealing with me, he kind of knew there was something behind all of that.
yeah.
And so we ended up going to my cousin Stephanie's wedding, and I feel like it was a shock to the system. Like, it was so much going on. Like, it was a beautiful wedding. We had a wonderful time, but it was so much going on. And I think that prior to us going back to the wedding, he had an idea, like I said, about what was going on with my family, but we hadn't talked about it.
Yeah.
And it was to the point where my mom wasn't doing that great. And my sister had her son, her oldest, and she wasn't doing that great. My mom was really struggling. She at the time had my niece as well. And I just remember knowing something was wrong and feeling like kind of like helpless. And I'm the type of person, I'm very like, if something's going on, I'm a fixer. Like, that's just who I am. I'm a
Mhm.
fixer. We're gonna, like, I don't play about having an elephant in the room when we acting like we can't move around the room, but we know that there's something there, but we're not gonna talk about it. I'm not that type of person. Like, if there's an elephant in the room, I'm gonna say, everybody see this damn elephant. Like, look, we smushed against the wall. We all see what it is. Like, let's find some way to address it.
Right.
So I was in a place because me and Mercy had just moved in together, and I knew that my mom was struggling. And if it was just me, it would have been a Deveron jump in and fix this and all handle it on her own, because that's just what I was used to doing.
Mhm.
But I had to actually have a conversation with Mercy of trying to figure out, one, how I kind of like broached the situation, because like I said, he knew about it, but we never talked about it. But I also was like struggling internally of like repeated patterns, right? The same things that I've been through. And now I'm also having embarrassment because I'm with my partner and he has to see this.
Mhm.
And, also being fearful of like, he's going to see just the hot mess that this is and be like, I don't want to deal with this. Like, and in my
Yeah.
eyes at the time, I felt like Mercy had come from a family that was so together and didn't have
Mhm.
issues, and, just very, everything was like on par. And so it was at that time that I had to be vulnerable, which I was not used to being, because vulnerability for me was something that I felt like those who loved you could use against you. And so I
Mm.
had to be vulnerable and tell him, like, I'm really struggling. This is why I'm so upset. This is why my, tolerance is very low, why I kind of seem more snappy. And I have to figure out something to do with my mom, because that's just the relationship that we have. I take care of my mom, and I can't be trying to start my life, in PA a few hours away. And I know my mom is struggling with these kids. Like, I don't want the next generation to be raised how I was raised, right?
Yeah.
And I had that conversation with him, and Mercy was like, I support you. Like, what do you want to do? Like, do you want your mom? And let me just tell you, dog, at the time, me and Mercy was living in a one-bedroom apartment,
I think I
okay?
remember this. Yeah.
One-bedroom apartment. And he was like, I support you. Like, what do you want to do? Like, do you want your mom to come with us? And at the time, I had to talk with my mom, like, "You're leaving, like, you're getting in the car with me. I will fight you if you do not get in the car, and I
Put
will
his
take."
hands on you.
Yeah, I was like, "I'll take you and Carmen." Well, my mom had a boyfriend, and she was not thinking about leaving him, and first it was like, "Oh, he's just coming to visit," and all this other stuff, and then he ended up staying. So it was me, Mercy, Carmen, my niece, and my mom and her boyfriend,
Mm,
and
in a one
my dog
bedroom.
in a one bedroom. And then came my 2 nephews later on, but we're not gonna talk about that. But what I learned was that, 1, nobody's a mind reader, right?
Hmm.
Everybody has their own stuff, but you have to be vocal and communicate with your partner about what you need in
Yeah.
order for y'all to come up with a plan, because it takes 2. And it wasn't
Hmm.
like, although I was used to dealing with these things on my own, and I would have came up with a plan and kind of dealt with it on my own, I now had a partner who was, 1, willing to listen to me, give me space and understanding, but also being willing to say, like, let's figure this out together, and not be judgmental and not kind of take advantage of me being vulnerable. And so
Mm,
that really helped me feel like, you know what, I can trust this person, right?
yeah.
And it helped me build on, like, look, like, you were vulnerable and you didn't die.
Right. Right. And it
That was
sounds so crazy
important.
when you have to say that, but people who don't understand trauma, especially relational trauma, like that is literally what you feel like. You feel like,
Yes.
kind of bearing my soul to this person or these people is going to I'm gonna be dead if I do that. Like
Yeah.
it don't make sense, but it's truly the way it feels for sure.
Mhm. It does. It definitely does. So, that situation taught me a lot, and that was like, you know, creating good foundation for our relationship. What about
Yeah.
you?
So I will say pretty similar. Before me and my now husband got married, I had started therapy like a few years before we had got married. And part of the reason why I wanted to, start therapy was because I had lots of different childhood experiences. I definitely had a childhood experience that was super traumatic for me. And I went through life like not talking about it, not really, I think I had maybe had one or two conversations with my mom about it. And like, that was really it. And I had told like friends of mine about the experience, but I hadn't really unpacked it with a professional, And
Mhm.
I think part of the reason why I don't think I did for the longest time is because again, when you have, traumatic experiences, especially centered around like abuse, for me anyway, the way I internalized that was like, okay, well, you about to just, you're about to achieve all of these things. And I thought that those achievements somehow meant that like I was okay. Like that situation happened and it was unfortunate, but like it look at how my life turned out now. Like that
Mhm.
happened, but like this is what I've created. So in some ways, and I think that's where some of the perfectionism had come from, right? It's like if I could just do all these things, in such a great way, like I don't have to talk about this thing that happened to me. I don't have to address it. But it started to, it started to really kind of root its ugly head because that's also what happens with trauma is that it doesn't matter how much you try to cover it up, it still does eventually root its ugly head. And it started to show up in my professional life. And I think if I'm being honest, it definitely has showed up in my personal life, with my relationship and just other relationships that I had. And so I the thing that I think was so challenging for me in terms of talking about this traumatic event was again, like I said, we didn't talk about it much, but when it was brought up to me when I was a kid, it was used as a weapon. Like, oh, that didn't happen to you, you know?
Oh, okay.
So I had so many, as a trauma survivor, there's already challenges with your memory. Like, did you remember it correctly? Right? Did it happen the way you are telling people it happened? Right? And then to have somebody in moments of childish arguments to like say that didn't happen to you, you made that up. Like, so I think I was kind of struggling with that too. Like, if I share this thing, am I going to be believed? Right? Is this going to, and is it going to like change our relationship? And so my therapist will really kind of help me like as far as like addressing my communication and really working on being, more open and more vulnerable about my life and who I was. I think I was in most situations, but in that situation, I was really struggling with like how I was going to be perceived, or how I was going to be seen, by my then at that time my fiance.
Mhm.
And so, I did decide to share, that traumatic event that I had gone through that I really wanted to share. And I think what was going through my mind was like, you about to marry this man and he don't even know this part about you. Like, what does that say about you? What does it say about your relationship? If he isn't good enough to know this part of you, or you're, having so many struggles with sharing this part about you. And not to say that you should rush having those conversations, but it's telling that you're willing to spend the rest of your life with somebody, but you're not willing to share these things with that person, right?
Mhm.
And so I had this conversation with him, and it was like it was eating at me, because it was like I had been in therapy for months, and I had unpacked a lot of the trauma. I had gone through like EMDR therapy, and I was unpacking a lot of different stuff. And to be fair, I was really uncovering a lot of things that I had buried. So I'm sure that definitely had a lot to do with like, I can't deal with one more thing. Like, I'm already unpacking this shit. Like, I can't even add nothing else to this. So I think that was a lot of my avoidance to have that conversation. But
Mhm.
I did have the conversation with him, and really what it taught me was that every situation when you're discussing your truth is not going to be met with invalidation or like some kind of like denial of your experience. Because I think I was really afraid of that. You know what I mean? And it also opened up a conversation for us to really talk about like what are our non-negotiables, because I think at that time I had wanted us to do premarital counseling, and it wasn't necessarily something that he thought was necessary, but he was like, if you really, really want to, we can. And in hindsight, that should have been a an indication to me of just how low maintenance I was being in my relationships. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, low maintenance being like not expecting things from people, not requiring things of people, not allowing my needs to be known, not, being forceful and expressive about like what I need to be whole and complete in my relationships. Because when you're a people pleaser, you don't even have any concept of any of that, because your goal
Others.
to is for others, right? Your goal is to like make sure that you are, dim, that your light is dim, and that you are, not rocking the boat, and you're not expecting things from people, right?
Mhm.
And I decided like, no, we're good. We don't need to do premarital counseling. And I knew I wanted to, and while he did, drag his feet a little bit, I mean, he definitely was willing to do it if I really wanted to. And again, sometimes when you're given the option to choose, when you're a people pleaser, you don't know how to choose, right? So I was like, oh no, it's fine. I think we'll be good. I mean, we had a conversation about our non-negotiables and like what we wanted our marriage to look like. And so what it showed me though was there's so much power and so much beauty in allowing somebody to see you fully. And I think,
Yes.
if I'm being honest, at that point, that was just one aspect of being seen fully. But like, being seen fully and like bearing all of me to somebody has always been somewhat scary. You know what I mean? It's definitely been somewhat scary, if I'm being honest. It's scary. It's scary. It's you never know how someone is gonna, perceive that. You never know if that's gonna run people away. And already having had so many challenges with rejection, you know what I mean, and
Mhm.
abandonment, you're really careful, right? And so I think in lots of ways that's why it's been so scary. But for this particular situation, I think it was one of the first moments where I got to like, be vulnerable and share, a part of myself that was really hard to talk about. And it was not as bad. Like you said, I ain't die. Right. So it wasn't as bad as I was telling myself. And what I'm learning about myself is that oftentimes the things that I'm preoccupied with thinking about and overthinking about, and it never ends up being as bad as I envision it, right? And so
Mhm.
it's really important for me in my journey to remind myself of that, like remind myself that it's never as bad as you think it's going to be. And if it is, you've gotten through the worst parts of your life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You've gotten through that. So you'll get through this too. You know what I mean? It's nothing you can't get through, and so that's what I, have to continue to remind myself. So that is definitely one of the first experiences where I kind of, bared that, and it wasn't as bad as I thought. So
I'm glad that you had that experience, and I think the other
yeah.
part of that is that being vulnerable with someone else, especially when you have trauma history,
Hmm.
sometimes even being vulnerable with yourself is a task, right? It's difficult. Sometimes you've
Very.
buried things so deep that you haven't even been able to explore fully. And so the idea of bringing someone in and you haven't already kind of did a look around and seen what was in there, kind of cleaned up before somebody walked in there,
For
it
real.
was crazy because you were like, I don't know what can run out here, right? Like
For real.
I'm trying to prepare us both because I can't even
For
tell you what to expect, right? So
exactly.
I think like that's the other aspect of being a trauma survivor and trying to be in relationships, whether it be with a romantic partner or, even having friendships, just any type of
Yeah.
interaction. There is that part of being fearful, of being vulnerable, because sometimes we don't even have opportunities to be vulnerable with ourselves. So I'm
Hmm.
glad that you had that opportunity. And like you said, you did not die. So
Right. Exactly.
I'm going to ask you another
That's funny.
question.
Okay.
Can you describe a time where you had to make a difficult choice between pursuing your individual goals and nurturing your romantic relationship? And what factors did you consider and what insights emerged from that experience?
So at first I was having like, I didn't really know. And then I was thinking, one of the decisions that I made. So with me and my husband, boyfriend at the time, or just some guy that I met at the time, I was in graduate school. I was halfway through graduate school at the time when we met. And you know, and our relationship from the time we met was long distance, right? So we were about 5 hours apart. We met on a whim on a, holiday weekend. We had some mutual friends, or like one of my friends was dating one of his friends. So that's kind of how we initially met. And it was honestly from that moment that we met, we were like pretty inseparable. We were separated. We were 5 hours away, but we really were pretty exclusive, from the time that we met, right?
Hmm.
And I was in graduate school, so I had already, made it clear that I was like gonna finish school. I was not gonna make any choices or any decisions about the next stage of that relationship until, I was done with school. But the closer and closer I got done with to getting done with school, right, the relationship started to get serious. And, I think we both knew that we wanted to pursue what our relationship could look like, living in the same house, right? Or living, in closer proximity, right?
Hmm.
So, we had those discussions, and I'm a planner, right? So I want, time to kind of, plan out what, and was a big decision, right? I was moving away, and I had already had plans to move once I was done with school. It just so happened that I met my husband. And so the location of where I was moving was changing, but I really didn't have plans to stay in the area like once I had, finished school. And so we talked a lot about, relocating to other areas. And, he kind of had made the suggestion, like, well, why don't you just move here? And I was like, oh, I mean, I guess I could, I guess, I mean, I could, I could still work. I could still get my license. I could still be a licensed professional counselor. Like, I don't necessarily have to be, at the time I was going to school in Ohio.
Hmm.
And I was like, I don't have to, stay in Ohio. That was just kind of my vision because that's where I was in school. And I was like, well, I'll probably move to Cleveland or Columbus, when I get done with school. And so, he had mentioned that. I was like, okay, well, I mean, I guess that's something that I could definitely pursue. And so, again, we really wanted to focus on, making a decision to be like living together, you know what I mean? And I wasn't really nervous about that because I think I was still a little bit younger than I am now. I mean, I'm still young. I keep telling you I ain't old head. So I was still pretty young at the time. And I just felt like if it don't work out, I just move. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't really concerned that it wouldn't work out, but I was like, I mean, if it doesn't work out, I'll just move out and go back home or something. And so but what I was concerned about was like, well, I get, you know, clinical and professional opportunities that are going to grow my skills as a therapist and as a counselor. Am I
Mhm.
going to have those opportunities? And so, what I found out was that, yeah, I had lots of great opportunities. I worked in a outpatient drug and alcohol setting where I got to grow as a clinician, got trained in different therapy models, got to run my own groups, got to create curriculums. I mean, I just was able in that first job that I had, I just got to create so much. And the supervisor that initially had was a little bit younger than me. Or no, I'm sorry, she was a little bit older than me, but she was still on the young side.
Mhm.
And then she ended up leaving, and I had a coworker who had been in the field for probably at that point like 20 years, and she ended up being my supervisor. And I truly credit like my clinical experience, my clinical expertise, my clinical judgment. I like credit her so much because she, at that time, heroin was really, really, it was like killing people like bad. I mean, it's bad now, but like back then it was really, really, really bad. And
Mhm.
where I was working in Delaware County, PA, the heroin was like its most potent and its cheapest. So it was like it was just bad. So I was making lots of decisions about these clients, and not to like get on a soapbox but or like get off topic, but it was hard to make decisions about what I thought was in the best interest of the client. And so she really, really taught me like how to truly meet clients where they are. If I wanted to make a decision about a client that was kind of unorthodox, she would like say, okay, what do you want to do? Tell me how you're going to do it, and I'll support you. So she really taught me to trust myself clinically, trust
Mhm.
my expertise, trust what I think is in the best interest of the client, and be able to explain why you're doing what you're doing and how are you including the client in the process. I mean, I just credit her so much for giving me those opportunities that I mean, I'm sure I would have gotten somewhere else, but everything happens for a reason. And I, you know, didn't initially plan on living in Westchester and working in PA, but that's what happened. And so I got to really grow as a clinician in ways that I just am so happy and proud of that I have been able to have those experiences. And then I was also able to grow my relationship. I was able to like, make that decision and grow in that relationship. So I think it was definitely, my struggle was like I wanted to still have my identity around like being able to, this was like my passion. So I really wanted to make sure that I was in a situation where I could really grow. And it didn't have to be an all or nothing thing. It didn't have to be, I either live here or, we in this relationship. We were able to like make a decision, and I was able to get both. So that was, one of the times where, having to make a tough decision it ended up not being so bad.
Compromise.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you?
I would say, one of the great things and things that I really love about my husband is he's very supportive. He knows that I am very goal driven, and I mean, to the point where before we got the kids and we bought a house, I would literally be searching all over. Like there was times when we were thinking about I was talking to him about going overseas to do social work because I kind of got involved with like a traveling social work agency, so there was opportunities everywhere. And then we talked about other places in the United States to go. And one good thing about my husband, he's like, he works from home for his job. He's like, I could work anywhere. So like whatever you want to do, I support you. He knows that my goals are really important to me. But
Yeah.
in in that, since I'm such a goal driven person, I also am someone who's a pusher for the people that are around me, right? And so while I am pursuing things that are important to me, I also want my loved ones to do things as well. And so that is something that he has accepted. We have compromised is like how hard I'm going to push him because I can be a pusher, like,
Yeah.
hard. But I'm someone who, if he tells me he's interested in something, he tells me that he has dreams of something, I'm going to do everything in my power to help you get there, but also to keep you on track. Like, I'm going to remind you of this is what you talked to me about. This is what you said was important to you. Where are we? right now, what are we doing that's going to help us get to that point, right? And I say us
Mhm.
because your dreams are my dreams, your goals are my goals, right? And the same
Yeah.
way that he is so freely supporting of me, I want to be that way for him as well. Um, and so I would say, like, although there has been nothing that we kinda had, like, a disagreement where I had to put my professional goals on hold or anything like that, I will say, going back to what I talked about, bringing my mom to live with us and then, my nephews, and then at some point in time, I also had my sisters come, at
Mhm.
different times in, fresh in our relationship of, early on of us getting married, and even though I was literally in graduate school, working a full-time job, doing, practicums for my master's program, while also trying to help my mother and my sisters with their mental health and addiction concerns, while also trying to support these kiddos. And also being freshly married, and I had a
Mhm.
dog who also had
Mhm.
medical issues. So I will say, like, that's probably the highlight of trying to figure out how to balance it all, and that was probably, like, the most conflict was, like,
Mhm.
"Look, like, what's going on? Like, what can we do
Right.
it all?" But I will say, like, we definitely consider, like, what is the height of, like, what's the most important, and let's make a
Mhm.
list and address that first, and then what can kinda trickle down and not be addressed, right? And obviously for me, like I said, I'm very goal driven, I'm very family oriented, so, for me, there was no, like, hierarchy on that list. It was like everything is important, but my
Right.
husband has he really is good with listening to me, making me feel heard, kind of pointing out what the goals are, and then coming up with a plan together on how we can get it done. Like,
Yeah.
he's really good at that, and that's something that we have definitely applied in our relationship of he knows that I am very, like, focused on these goals, and I can't come up with the list of most important because they all feel very important and very, like, taxing. But just, like,
Mhm.
coming up with a solution of, okay, like, what does this plan look like? And how can we
Right.
get it going? Like, that's the most important thing. And how can we see progress in achieving this plan? So I would
Mhm.
say that's the way that he has supported me in that aspect in our relationship.
It's great to have a supportive partner for sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, life is rough, and to live this life and be with somebody and not feel like they got your back is tough, you know. So it's nice to have that for sure.
Yes, it is.
All right. The next question is, share a story about a time when you and your partner faced a seemingly insurmountable challenge. How did you navigate it, and what did it reveal about your resilience as a couple?
So I would say losing my mom. I think that that was
Mhm.
like the biggest thing because we were not prepared for it.
Mhm.
At the time that my mom passed, we had spoken with her. She had, all of my nephews and my niece, and she was just really having a hard time. And I had been fighting for a long time with my mom to try to get her to move closer because she moved to Pennsylvania to Westchester where we were at, and then my grandmother got really sick and she just really wanted to be close to her, so she moved back home. And, I supported that, and then my grandmother passed, and I thought, when she passed, she would come back, and she didn't. And then she just continued to struggle, and I continued to try to work on motivating her and encouraging her to move back. And there was always like something in the way. And when she had passed, we had finally kind of me and her had did therapy together. We had to kind of come to like a aha moment where she was actually putting things into place to move.
Mhm.
And, my aunt was helping her, like, make sure she got her stuff in order so we could get her into, low income housing near us, and, like, everything was falling into place. She had brought the boys to us as well as Carmen because it was just a plan of getting them, kind of started here, and then she would
Mhm.
come with, my youngest nephew, and because he wasn't in school yet, so he would come with her, and we would get them their place. And so when she passed, it was like out of nowhere, complete shock and just like devastated. And I remember
Mhm.
like literally the moment that it happened. My husband was downstairs, and at the time, that's where his man cave and office were. And I remember I got the call. It was not the best call situation of how I learned about it, but I
Mhm.
just remember feeling like I was, like, literally falling, like, free falling, and there was nothing to stop me. But I also felt like the most pain ever, like, it was just, like, this unimaginable pain, and I couldn't stop crying, and I couldn't even muster up the words to tell him. Like, it was like I was just falling in this deep, dark hole, and everything around me was gone, like, nobody my dog was there, he was, like, trying to get my attention, he knew I was, like, having a hard time, and I just
Yeah.
could not focus, and my husband ended up hearing me, like, literally falling apart upstairs. And eventually I was able to muster up the words that my mom died.
Mhm.
And he took a moment, like he tried to comfort me as best as he could, but I was just in it. Like I couldn't be around anybody at that time. I was trying to figure out like I don't know if you've ever been like in so much pain emotionally, but I was like
Mhm.
I have to numb myself because this is just too much. It's gonna eat me alive. And I had my niece and my oldest nephew downstairs. They were sleeping still. So I was like, I have to tell them. I have
Yeah.
to start making phone calls because I refuse for my loved ones to start finding out on social media before I could make them the call because that's horrible. And so I was
Yeah.
like, I have to numb myself. Like, this is just, I can't function in this. I had to call my aunt. Like, she doesn't even know. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was just because my aunt lived
Mhm.
closer to me than my mom. So I had to tell her. Like, it was just, I knew I had to numb myself. And I just
Mhm.
remember my husband went outside. He wouldn't cry in front of me. Not that he can't cry in front of me, but he felt like I was in so much pain that he couldn't put more of that on me. And I just remember he went outside for a minute. He cried. I knew he was crying. And he came in. And I just remember he kind of like, it was like he went outside, he cried, and he came back inside. He was like, "What do you want me to do?" And it was like
Mhm.
we both had that light switch of like, now what? Like, now where
Yeah.
do we go from this? And, you know, after doing that, I told, I made my phone calls, kind of got that in motion. I went and told, my niece and nephew. And then I realized I had to tell my sisters, and
Mhm.
they were not in good places mentally. Like I said before, both my sisters have struggled with mental health and addiction. And so that was another thing that was on my head, right? Like, and I have their kids, and, I didn't know at the time where my two nephews were at. And so it was just like chaos. And I could see my husband seeing like I was spiraling, like trying to be the fixer, Deveron. Like I said,
Mhm.
I'm a fixer. And also trying to numb myself to deal with all of these things. And Mercy had a very close relationship with my mom. Like they had their own relationship. And
Yeah.
I would just say he did such a wonderful job of, and I don't ever want someone to diminish their own grief and feelings. I feel like that's important. And I told him throughout the process, like, you need to take your time and like grieve her the way that you need to grieve her. If you need to cry, cry. You can cry in front of me, right?
Mhm.
But he did such a great job supporting me and supporting the kids and, just being so open to whatever I needed. And, my biggest thing was I have to protect the kids. I have to do all of these things. And Mercy was just like, whatever you need. If you tell me we need to go to war, we'll go to war. If you tell me we need to
Mhm.
go and kidnap some kids, we'll kidnap some kids. Like Mercy
Right.
was like, so there was nothing I could have told him at that time that he would have said no to me about. Like he
Mhm.
was, and I don't know any man outside of my uncle who is just with the like, what do you need? This is like, I'm standing behind you 100%. Like,
He was with the shits, like,
with
for
the
real.
like for real, like look, when I say we took a vow to each other, like I will say, before he had shown me that our vows, he took them serious, but this time it was like sickness and in health. Like right now, you're at your lowest. Like you can't get no more lower than this. What do you need me to do? What do you
Mhm.
tell me what you need me to do, and I'm gonna make it happen. Like I could have told Mercy we need to rob a bank and like go like take these kids and run away. And I'm pretty sure he probably would have did it. Like
Yeah.
So it was just one of those things where, even after the services and stuff, we had to fight a custody battle for my nephews and, trying to get my youngest nephew, well, actually the middle nephew, trying to get him and all his services set up here and just going through the red tape and everything. It was a lot. It was a lot to deal with while still grieving. And I will just
Yeah.
say my husband, like, he just showed me the type of man his parents raised him to be.
Mhm.
And I know already, like I said, the background that I come from, the history that I come from, the trauma that I come from, it's not an easy task at all. I seen my uncle who, God rest his soul, he did it and completely, stepped up, and that was really the idea of the perfect man to me. And then to
Mhm.
have a husband to do that, and also knowing that my uncle said it when I was first, telling her I was engaged, he was like, Mercy, this family is crazy. Like, it's not too
Are you
late to
ready?
leave. Like, he was like, Mercy, I'm telling you, it's not too late to leave. Like, I know you love her, but her family is crazy. But just seeing how he did the same exact thing that my uncle did for us. And I
Mhm.
credit him a lot of being, of course I had a lot of different people in my life who helped save us and give us, structure and a good foundation. But my uncle is someone who I've always credited for being an angel to me and my siblings. And so seeing
Yeah.
my husband step up so freely, being young, us not having kids, we went through our own battles of, trying to have kids, not having kids. We were able to do whatever we wanted to do. We had our
Mhm.
dog, but no real, ties or anything, to literally just stepping up and saying, like, I'm going to take on these kids. I'm going to do whatever I need to. No questions asked. I just feel like that told me exactly who it was that I married. It
Mhm.
was like concrete. This is who you chose to marry, and
Yeah.
you picked the right person. And my stepmom
Mhm.
and my dad and everyone else constantly reminds me of just the person that I married, because they're like, most people, my stepmom says all the time, like, most people, if they were faced with that level of grief, that level of hardship, you know, and not just losing your partner, losing their, mother, their parent, but also fighting a custody battle, taking on children that are not their own, dealing with children who have their own trauma, dealing with
Mhm.
children who you have to also deal with their parents, and their parents not always being the easiest to deal with.
Right.
And taking it in stride and just being like, we got this. Like,
Mhm.
that showed me, like, I did a thing.
Yeah. Not I did a thing, but for real though. For real. Cause honestly, Irby always says this, my husband always says this, you don't know somebody until you have to go through something traumatic. He used to always say that to me. And I'm like, we ain't gotta go through nothing for you to know I'm a rider. Like
Right.
but in lots of ways, it's easy to love somebody through moments where shit is good. You know what I mean? Where
Girl.
I don't have to question, you know what I mean, did I choose the right person? Like, you know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
so I think there is something to that. You know what I mean? You don't really know somebody and how far someone is willing to go for you until they gotta go. They gotta go. And then you
Girl.
like, okay, well, you was frauding, you know what I mean? You ain't trying to
Right?
go, you know what I
You
mean?
was giving
Or like,
words,
damn,
no
you
action.
going like yeah. Did you ask me a question? I'm sorry, I must have missed it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with Herb. Like, you do not
Mhm.
know, anybody truly until you have to go through the trenches with them,
Yeah.
because people will give
Mhm.
you lip service all day long. And
Yep.
I mean, also, like, you don't know what you're willing to do. Like, you don't
You
know
really
until you're
don't.
be put in these situations. And
Yeah.
then you put in these situations, and that's when you can't hide, you have to make a decision. That
Mhm.
is like the make or break moments. That
Yeah.
tells you who someone is. That shows you their character, and it
Yeah.
brings so much light to it. And like I said, I that situation is on, like, we definitely have had, and that's one of the things I said about our anniversary, our 10-year anniversary, is that we have endured so much within that 10 years, multiple
Yeah.
losses, personally and, outside family and friends and things like that, job situations and just so much. And it's so important to celebrate that journey, but also
Yeah.
like celebrate that our union is still strong, but even stronger. Like,
Mhm.
I'm so grateful for that experience and just being able to sit in it and come out the
Mhm.
other side, because not every relationship can do that.
Yeah,
What
for
about
sure.
you?
I will say when we made the decision to move from Westchester to Pittsburgh, I think that was definitely a challenge. And part of it is because, like I've said, I am a planner, right? So I'd say maybe 4 or 5 months before we got married, we had already been saving for a house before we got engaged. So then we
Mhm.
got engaged a few months after we had started saving for a house. And so it's like, how you gonna pay for a wedding and save for a house, right? But we were able to do it, right? I was working 2 jobs at the time. He was working 2 jobs at the time, and we really were able to pay for our own wedding. We definitely had bits and pieces of help from our family for sure, but the bulk of the wedding we paid for.
Mhm.
And we also continued to save for a house. We were able to save a lot, for a house as well. So that was a blessing, right? Because it's not always, sometimes at this point, it's like you got to choose one or the other. Do you want a wedding or do you want a house? Because you
Yes.
can't save for both, right? So what I think we were running into was that the houses, if anyone knows anything about Chester County or like suburbs outside of Philadelphia, it's it can be expensive, right? Good schools, and so you're really paying for the schools, right? In lots of ways, it taught me a lot about like that you know buying homes and home ownership is a lot of it is what you're paying for is you're paying for like school districts, right? And so we were like, we don't make enough money to be able to afford, a mortgage here, you know what I mean? And not be house poor, right? So the idea about moving to Pittsburgh came up, and I was like, oh, you should have said this like a year ago, because we could have definitely made this shake
Would
a
have
year
been out.
ago. Right. So I was like, cool. I was like, all right, so we'll get married, we'll, start looking for jobs and save, and then this time next year we'll hopefully be relocated.
Mhm.
And so we got married in August, and we had, I think between that time and August though, we had, just wanted to see what kind of jobs were. So what the job market was like. My husband wanted to see what the job market would be like for his line of work. And he was definitely getting, calls and emails like, oh yeah, come in for an interview and this and that. And at the time we had planned on waiting a year. So we were like, oh, we should be good. And so I remember we were coming back from our honeymoon, and my friend works at Highmark, and she sent me like a referral for a position. And I was like, I was like, what do you think? You think I should apply? He was like, I mean, it can't hurt, So I applied just to see what would happen. And then I don't know, we just started thinking about it, talking about it more, and we were like, should we wait, till April of next year, or should we just like see what happens? So we were like, let's just see what happens. I mean, at this time we didn't have any kids; it was just us. So we started putting out, job and resumes and stuff like that, and we were getting calls. We had a really good friend who lived in Pittsburgh at the time, so he was helping us find apartments. So I think one weekend, Irby came down and was looking at apartments, was FaceTiming me so I could see like apartments that he had saw or that he had seen. And then maybe about a few weeks, maybe a month later, we went back down for interviews. And by the end of or the beginning of November, it was either the beginning of November or the end of November, we moved in. We found an apartment, moved. And so literally in, I don't know, maybe 2.5 months, we decided that we were going to move and everything. I mean, we always talk about how easy, it came together. And I will say that it was totally outside of my comfort zone. I need time in my mind. And what this showed me was I really don't need the time that I keep telling myself that I need, right? It's to me what I'm realizing in some ways, that's my fear talking. That is like me stalling, right?
Mhm.
Because again, we did that in 2.5 months. You know what I mean? Found jobs, found a place to stay in 2 months, 2.5 months. And I didn't need all this time that I was telling myself that I needed. You know what I mean? And I credit my husband in lots of ways because he when people say opposites attract, I do think there is something to that because he is the total opposite of that. He is the fly by the seat of his pants. He don't be thinking about planning what. Like if I want to do it, I'm just gonna do it. Like
Right?
that's really just who he is. And I am not like that. You know what I mean? To my core, I'm really not like that. I am in lots of ways such a worrier and I have a lot of, fear, like fear can definitely impact my choices. I definitely see that changing though in myself, but at that time, I don't do well with stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like I
No.
need some time. Like
Right?
I can't be making decisions about relocating my whole life in 2.5 months. But we did it. You know what I mean? And it was so smooth. It was, and I truly credit him for that. You know what I mean? Like I think without him making me feel like this could work, we could do it. Like it's not, like we could figure it out. I just feel like it was a reminder to me that, I don't need to live my life with all these restraints, you know what I mean, that I
Mhm.
have been living with for a large part of my life, that I can make a choice and see it through. And I don't have to give myself these arbitrary time limits, because I kept thinking to myself, like, what is the reason that I'm waiting until April of the next year? Like, what's the reason for that?
Mhm.
And there really wasn't a good enough reason for me to do that. So, I mean, our lease was almost up. I mean, it was the perfect time. So, yeah, I mean, we moved and it's been such a good experience ever since. So, I would say it showed me that there are things that I'm good at and things that I'm not good at. And it's okay for me to say like you're good at this, you can take the lead on this and I don't have to, I don't have to be involved in that. I mean, I'm definitely the type of person that doesn't necessarily feel like a man has to lead in every way. I don't
Mhm.
feel that way. I feel like I want to be in a partnership where my input is valued and that at the end of it, sometimes we're going to make the decision that I think is best. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And sometimes we're going to make the decision that you think is best. It doesn't mean that because you're a man, you get to make the finals. You get to have the final say. And we've both always been in agreement of that, that,
Mhm.
we value each other. We value what we both bring to this, and so, but in this moment, I just knew that I wasn't the best person to be driving the ship.
You gotta play on your strengths.
I didn't need to be driving the ship, and I was cool with that. So I will say for me, that was huge. And I know for some people, relocate, like how big is that? But it was really big for me because again, as I said earlier, when I moved to Westchester, I felt like I needed time to like wrap my mind around that. And I didn't
Mhm.
have a lot of time with this. And it turned out okay, So it's just, again, it's another reminder. And much of that is just like a trauma response, right? It's a trauma response to like, you know, having to make a choice where you don't always know what the end result's going to be. And to be fair, you never know what the end result's going to be. But for people who struggle with, you know, traumatic events, it is a little different for how they interpret things like that. It's a little bit
Yeah.
different for how they show up. Obviously everybody who suffers from trauma does not necessarily respond in the same way. But for me, I definitely know that like much of my fear has a lot to do with those traumatic events that I experienced for sure. So um it worked out though. It ended up working out. So that for me would be the challenge that we got to face together. Yeah. So, next question is discuss the concept of unconditional love with a romantic partner. Have you encountered moments where love was tested and how did you both work through them?
I would say unconditional love for us, like I said, our 10 years of marriage has had a lot of challenges. At one point, we had decided that we wanted to have a family, start a family. And, we tried, it wasn't successful. So we ended up going to our primary care doctors who did some tests. they then, informed us that I would need to go the infertility fertility route because of just hormone issues. And so we decided to do that. And my husband's, initially when we started off deciding to do that, our insurance was not that great. Did not know how expensive fertility treatments
Mm,
were and also how invasive they were.
mm,
Um, but yeah, not for the lighthearted. So did that, and I will say that definitely we were fresh in our marriage, and to be dealing with that as well as everything else, like I said, grad school and my family, immediate family, and all the stuff that was going on with them was a lot hormones. So when you do fertility treatments, part of the process is doing hormones. They give you medications to help you with your hormones to help you possibly get pregnant. And those medications will have you feel like you crazy, like crazy,
yeah.
snapping about things you don't never snap about, crying. And I am somebody, if I'm gonna cry, I don't want to cry in front of people. I would be
Mm-hmm.
crying about everything. Like everything was making me emotional. Watching this show would make me cry, like, just crazy everything. And so,
Yeah.
start off with the fertility treatments, we did you take, like, a pill, like, you take this, oral medication, and we weren't successful in that, and then we decided to do, the next step, which is it's been so long, I forget what the next step was, but it was, like, basically where you do a procedure, and we had to pay for that out of pocket, and it was costly,
Mm,
but it was also the tests that you have to do are very painful. And so we ended up did the first procedure, it wasn't successful, and then we ended up getting pregnant, and then we ended up losing it. I had a miscarriage, but I forget what it's called, but it's a miscarriage where your body doesn't know that it's miscarrying, and so it doesn't
mm,
get rid of the pregnancy. It holds on to the pregnancy. And
mm,
so I ended up having to help, like, get medical assistance to get rid of the pregnancy. Because
mm.
there was
Okay.
no, like, the baby wasn't viable. And so the
Mm-hmm.
first time I did that was very, very painful. They give you like this not oral medication. They give you these pills, and the doctor did not warn me for the actual, you know, what was gonna happen because you do it at home. And
Mm-hmm.
it was painful. Basically, your body starts to, if anyone has given labor before, your body starts to contract and
Mm.
you are expelling I don't even know what you call the miscarriage. And
Yeah.
it's like you're giving birth at home without any medication.
Mm.
So it
Mm.
takes a while. It's very, very painful.
Wow.
And I started to feel kind of mad at my husband because I felt like I physically was going through all of these painful procedures, and he had to do his part too, but his things that he had to do, his procedures that he had to do was not as invasive as mine, was not as painful as
Right.
mine. And my husband at the time was not really into showing his emotions too much to me. And so I
Mm-hmm.
felt very alone in that. And I just remember, having a big discussion, like a big blowout about it. And after that first time, we had like a kind of, like I said, like a big blow up. And then we kind of, like, went to counseling and kind of healed from that. And we decided we wanted to do it again. And this time we were going to go back to fertility treatment, but we were going to increase it. We were going to do a step down from IVF. And
Okay.
we decided we would pursue this, and we started it. It again, very invasive, very hard procedures that I had to go through. And he was beyond supportive this time, like, just so helpful, so there, like, what can he do? He knew that the things were painful, so he would, like, if I had to do a procedure, he would make sure, like, afterwards he would take care of me and, like, make sure I had, like, the things that I like to eat, or if kind of shut everything down so I could just like rest and things like that. And he was just like really, really good about it. Which
Mhm.
was not to say that he wasn't supported the first time, but I think again, I wasn't communicating my needs to
Mhm.
him. And I
Yeah.
was also someone who was used to going at things by myself. And
Mhm.
so then I was resenting him for not being a mind reader. And so when we finally had that big blowout, I think I finally communicated what it was that I was looking for, and he was able to actually step up to that task. And so we ended up doing the procedures again, and we got pregnant, which was like completely surprised. And then we ended up
Yeah.
losing the pregnancy. And this time my body did it again where it refused to, you know, lose the pregnancy. And I was further along
Mhm.
at that time. So I had to have a actual medical procedure.
Mm.
And I remember being so upset with myself because we had told his family, and we had
I
told my
remember that. Yeah.
family. We had listened to the heartbeats. We
Mm.
were so excited about becoming parents, and just he was excited about being a dad. And
Yeah.
then to find out, so when we found out that the pregnancy was not viable, my doctor was like, we have to get you in ASAP to, help you get rid of this pregnancy because it's not viable, and it's basically you can get very sick from having a non-viable pregnancy in your stomach
Mhm.
or in your uterus or whatever. So it was like no time to really think, right? And the other
Mhm.
thing that they don't tell you about is I had an OBGYN at the time because obviously I was further along. And so Mercy had to, he was like very open and honest with the doctor. She was like, she ain't doing them pills again. Like, she's not going through that
Right.
again.
Mhm.
He made the doctor actually explain to him what the procedure was going to be like, what my pain level was going to be like. He was like, because that was barbaric. Like, she's
Yeah.
not doing that again. And he just really was just like someone, I knew it was hard for him. And again, he knew how hard it was for me. And he just kind of like supported me in whatever I wanted. If I was frustrated with myself, I was mad at myself. But I also was just frustrated at the world. I was frustrated because, I was dealing with my sisters who seemed like they could literally just look at a guy and get pregnant. And, I was like, here I am married and like, professional. And so I was mad at the world. Like, I was just mad at everybody. And
Yeah.
he like sat with me in it. Like he sat with me in that grieving process, and like just showed me like, if you want to be mad at me, be mad at me. Like, you want to cuss, you want to scream, like I'm here for it. Like whatever. Like if you want to try it again, like, I'm here for it. Like he just was so supportive. And he I even we talked about like, possibly even thinking about adoption. And he was
Mhm.
like, he kind of struggled with that idea of like, raising someone else's child. But he was also like, if that's what you want, I will get over it. Like I will figure out what that means for us, and we can do it. So like he has been, and that's just one situation that we've been through in our 10 years, but he has just been so good at just like whatever it is that you need, I'm here for you. And like obviously I do the same for him, but when you have a trauma history and you have a history of feeling like you can't depend on other people and you can't
Mm.
trust other people, and that love is something that has been painful for you, and I
Mhm.
I tell him all the time I was perfectly fine with being by myself. I wasn't looking for a partner. I wasn't looking for a husband. I literally was like, I just want a whole bunch of dogs and I'll be good. Like, have my career, I'll be good. And I'm so glad that I have him and we have our partnership. But he
Mhm.
literally was made for me, right? Like he
Mm.
gets
Aw.
all of my kinks and just like my trauma. Like and the other thing is like I can talk to him about my trauma and he won't turn away. And like I think that that's another aspect of people who've had traumatic situations is you feel like sometimes there's things in you that are unlovable.
Yeah.
that even you don't want to kind of be open about. And
Mhm.
he doesn't shy away from it. Like, whatever I tell my husband, the biggest thing I think about me that could be unlovable, he's gonna show me that it's lovable. And he's
Mhm.
gonna be like, that's just a part of your story, but you're so much more. And even like when I would get into it with my siblings or my mom, and I would be a little bit too hard on them because, like I said, I'm a pusher. He'd be like, they just don't see you fully. Like, he always reminds me of, like, you're a good person, and like you love hard. Like, I don't think I know anyone else that loves as hard as you do. Like, he always
Mm.
points out, who Devron is fully. And I
Yeah.
feel like it's so important when you are used to not being seen and being misunderstood, and just feeling like you always have to prove yourself to others, to
Mhm.
be
Yeah.
seen fully, the good, the bad, the ugly, and feeling like, what, there's nothing you can say or do that's going to make me not love you. That to me
Right.
is unconditional love. And I feel like my husband has that for me. Like,
Mm.
he definitely will sit with me in my shit, and he'll tell me about myself. Like, he's a straight shooter, but
Mhm.
he will sit with me and then be like, "All right, now let's, like, where do we go from here? Like, what do you want to
Yeah.
do?" And lets me, be the voice of reason, and we talk about it and figure a way to move on. But like, he just fits me well. I'm very
Mm.
appreciative of him.